A galactic sovereign pays millions for the best security in the universe, expecting high-tech energy shields and towering alien brutes. Instead, she gets a quiet, unassuming man from Earth. But when the deadliest assassins in the sector finally breach her throne room, they don't attack. They drop their weapons, terrified, because they know exactly who he is. Queen Beatrice of the Orion Ascendancy sat in the dimly lit VIP booth of a neutral space station, her posture rigid with a mixture of regal pride and sheer, unadulterated desperation. She was the ruler of 7 star systems, commanding a fleet that could glass a planet in hours, yet she could not even trust the guards standing outside her door. In the last 3 months, she had survived 2 poisoning attempts and a kinetic drone strike on her private shuttle. Her royal detail, the legendary Praetorian Guard, had been thoroughly compromised. The Ascendancy was tearing itself apart from the inside, fueled by the greed of her uncle, Duke Arthur, who wanted the throne and the lucrative iridium mining contracts that came with it. Beatrice needed an outsider, someone completely untethered from the political web of her empire. Across the steel table sat Simon, a high-end intelligence broker whose tailored suit belied his ruthless reputation. He tapped a glass datapad, sliding it across the table. "I have exactly what you need, Your Majesty," Simon said, his voice a smooth baritone. "But you must look past your traditional expectations of what a bodyguard should be." Beatrice glanced at the glowing file, a holographic bust projected upward. It wasn't a towering Krogan-esque brute. It wasn't a multi-limbed insectoid with chitinous armor. It was a human. Amale. Average height, perhaps a little over 6 feet, with a neatly trimmed beard, cold gray eyes, and short, dark hair. He was wearing civilian clothes. A human? Beatrice's brow furrowed. Humanity had only been part of the wider galactic community for 3 decades. They were known mostly as traders, engineers, and occasionally reckless pioneers. They didn't have natural dermal plating, venomous fangs, or the ability to see in the infrared spectrum. "Simon, my enemies are hiring the Crimson Syndicate. They use heavy plasma casters and phase-shifting cloaks. You want me to trust my life to a species whose bodies can be broken by a moderate fall?" Simon smiled, leaning forward. "Your Majesty, you are thinking of war as a biological contest. Humans do not fight with their biology. They fight with their paranoia and their unimaginable capacity for calculated violence. His name is Thomas Graves. Before humanity reached the stars, he spent a decade in their earthbound conflicts. He operated within a Tier 1 military unit, then transitioned to private military contracting for a real-world Earth corporation called Aegis Defense Services, operating in places like Baghdad and Kabul cities that make our worst hive worlds look like luxury resorts. When Earth expanded, he brought his trade to the stars." "And what exactly is his trade?" Beatrice asked, still skeptical. "Keeping the breathing from becoming the dead," a voice said from the shadows. Beatrice flinched. From the dark corner of the booth, a corner her thermal optics explicitly told her was completely empty, a figure stepped forward. It was Thomas Graves. He moved with a terrifying absence of sound, his footsteps swallowed by the decking. He wasn't wearing heavy armor. He wore a dark, flexible combat jacket and cargo trousers, looking more like a blue-collar mechanic than a royal protector. "How did you get in here?" Beatrice demanded, her hand instinctively hovering over the concealed plasma pistol in her robes. "Your perimeter detail relies exclusively on automated motion sensors and thermal sweeps," Graves said, his voice flat, professional, and devoid of the deference Beatrice was used to. "I routed a localized thermal dampening loop through my jacket and walked directly behind your third guard when he turned his head to look at a passing maintenance drone. It took me 4 minutes to bypass a security detail that costs you 5 million credits a year." Beatrice stared at him, stunned. Graves pulled up a chair and sat down without asking permission. "You're dead, Your Majesty. Duke Arthur has paid off your comms officer, your chief of transportation, and at least 2 of your chefs. Your schedules are highly predictable. You take the same gravcar route to the Senate every Tuesday. You sit near reinforced glass that isn't rated for hypervelocity kinetic slugs. I've been watching you for 2 days to assess the contract. If I were the one hired to kill you, you would have choked on your morning tea yesterday." Silence hung heavily in the room. Simon simply sipped his drink, looking terribly amused. Beatrice felt a cold spike of fear, followed immediately by a wave of intense relief. For the first time in months, someone was telling her the brutal, unvarnished truth. She looked into Graves's eyes. There was no arrogance there, no bravado. Just the cold, mechanical assessment of a man who viewed the universe entirely through the lens of threat vectors. "How much?" she asked. 50 million credits. Half up front, half when Duke Arthur is either in prison or in the ground, Graves replied seamlessly. "And I have total operational control. When I say we move, we move. When I say you cancel a gala, you cancel it. You don't question my methods. You are not a queen to me. You are the package. And I have never, in 20 years of operating, lost a package." Beatrice took a deep breath, steeling her nerves. "Consider yourself hired, Mr. Graves. Keep me alive." Within 48 hours, the royal palace of Ethelgard was fundamentally transformed, though a casual observer wouldn't have noticed. Thomas Graves did not bring in heavy energy shields or automated defense turrets. He brought something much more alien to the ascendancy: human tactical doctrine. Beatrice watched in fascination as Graves systematically dismantled centuries of royal tradition. "The problem with alien security forces," Graves explained one evening, standing over a holographic map of the palace in Beatrice's private study, "is that they rely on overwhelming technological superiority. They trust their scanners. They trust their shields. They build massive, predictable fortresses. Humans have spent 10,000 years killing each other with sharp pieces of metal, and then with fast-moving pieces of metal. We know that technology fails. The only thing that doesn't fail is geometry and unpredictability." He pointed to the royal procession route. "We are changing this immediately. No more direct routes. We use staggered departures. 3 identical grav cars, leaving at different times, taking randomized paths. We don't announce your arrival until you are already inside the building." "The nobility will think I am cowering," Beatrice protested weakly, though she was already writing down his instructions. "Let them think you're cowering while you outlive them," Graves countered, not looking up from the map. "Next, your personal guard. I've dismissed the inner circle." Beatrice gasped. "The Praetorians? You dismissed them?" "I reassign them to the outer perimeter. They are walking targets. Big, shiny, and predictable. From now on, your inner circle is just me. If an assassin breaches the outer perimeter, the Praetorians will engage them with plasma fire. That creates noise. Noise gives us time. Time gives us distance. Distance gives us survival." Over the next 2 weeks, Beatrice realized just how terrifyingly effective Graves was. He operated on a concept he called the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. He told her it was a philosophy born from ancient human fighter pilot. He was constantly analyzing the environment, adjusting to anomalies before they became threats. He replaced the ultra-modern energy doors of her panic room with high-density kinetic steel from Earth, manually operated by heavy mechanical levers. "Energy grids can be sliced or EMP'd," Graves had muttered while installing it himself. 2 tons of cold-rolled earth steel with a mechanical deadbolt cannot. He also carried a weapon that baffled her royal armorers. Instead of a plasma caster or a particle beam, Graves carried a modified kinetic rifle, a descendant of the Sig Sauer MCX spear, heavily customized for vacuum and low-gravity environment. It fired 6.8 millimeters tungsten-tipped sabots. "Why use primitive chemical propellants?" Beatrice had asked, eyeing the matte black weapon resting on his chest rig. "Energy weapons cauterize wounds and dissipate against deflector shields," Graves had replied, his tone chillingly casual. "Tungsten moving at 4,000 feet per second doesn't care about your deflector shield. It punches through the kinetic barrier before the microprocessors can register the impact, and it shatters whatever biological mass is standing behind it. It's loud, it's messy, and it works every single time." Despite his cold demeanor, a strange bond began to form between the queen and her human shadow. Graves was professional to a fault, but Beatrice noticed the small things. He always ensured her favorite tea was vetted not just by scanners, but by a human chemical analysis kit. When she was exhausted from the political maneuvering, he would subtly clear the room of sycophants by citing security protocols. He was a wall of quiet certainty in a life that had become defined by paranoia. The ultimate test came on the eve of the Ascendancy Foundation Gala. It was a mandatory political event hosted in the grand conservatory of the palace. Beatrice had to be there to project strength, to show the nobility, and specifically Duke Arthur, that she was unfazed by his shadow war. Graves had opposed her attendance vehemently, but eventually conceded. "If you have to go, we play it my way," he had said. The evening was opulent. Thousands of nobles, dressed in bioluminescent silks and gravity-defying jewelry, mingled under a massive dome of crystalline glass, overlooking the glittering capital city. The air was thick with the scent of alien orchids and the low hum of polite, venomous conversation. Beatrice stood on a raised dais, sipping a glass of imported wine. 10 feet to her right, cloaked in the shadows of a massive marble pillar, stood Graves. He was wearing a tailored suit, but the bulk of his concealed armor and weaponry was hidden beneath it. His eyes never stopped moving, scanning hands, waistlines, and sightlines. Duke Arthur approached the dais. He was an older alien, his facial ridges smoothed by age, holding a silver cane. He smiled warmly, bowing before Beatrice. "My queen," Arthur purred, "you look radiant tonight, though I must admit, I am surprised to see you relying on a human for your personal protection. Has the royal treasury fallen so low?" Beatrice smiled, a razor-thin expression. "Mr. Graves comes highly recommended, uncle. He offers a unique perspective on survival." Arthur chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Survival is an art form, my dear. One must always be prepared for sudden shifts in the atmosphere." He tapped his cane on the marble floor twice. Graves moved before the lights even flickered. The entire power grid of the palace conservatory died instantly. The bioluminescent clothes of the nobles were suddenly the only source of light, casting eerie, shifting colors across the pitch-black room. Panic erupted. Screams echoed as the harmonic hum of the outer energy shields whined and died. "Move!" Graves barked. He materialized beside Beatrice out of the darkness, grabbing her arm with vice-like strength. He didn't pull her toward the main exits, where the Praetorian guards were frantically trying to restore order. He pulled her backward, into the servant corridors behind the dais. A massive explosion rocked the front entrance of the conservatory. The heavy adamantine doors were blown off their hinges by a shaped plasma charge. Through the smoke and fire stepped 5 figures wearing matte crimson combat armor, their visors glowing with a sinister red light. The Crimson Syndicate. They didn't bother with the screaming nobles. They raised heavy particle cannons and systematically slaughtered the Praetorian guards, who were blinded by the sudden darkness and confused by the lack of automated targeting systems. The assassins moved with terrifying, synchronized precision, stepping over the burning bodies of the royal guard and sweeping their weapons toward the dais. But Beatrice was already gone. Graves dragged her down a narrow, unlit corridor. His night vision monocle flipped down over his right eye. "Breathe," he ordered calmly, his voice a stark contrast to the chaos echoing behind them. "We are going to the secondary safe room, the one I built." "They breached the perimeter!" Beatrice gasped, struggling to keep up with his long strides. "The Praetorians are dead." "Expected," Graves replied flatly. "They bypassed the security grid from the inside. Arthur gave them the codes. But Arthur doesn't know about the mechanical retrofits in Sector 4. Keep moving." They reached the end of the corridor. Before them stood the massive, unassuming steel door Graves had installed weeks prior. He shoved the heavy mechanical lever, pushed Beatrice inside, and pulled the door shut, locking the thick deadbolts into the stone frame with a loud, final clang. The room was small, lit by a single chemical light stick that cast a harsh green glow. It was a dead end. "Graves! There's no way out of here." Beatrice panicked, backing against the cold stone wall. "That's the point," Graves said. He didn't look at her. He was standing in the center of the room, facing the steel door. He calmly shrugged off his suit jacket, letting it drop to the floor, revealing the heavy tactical rig beneath. He unslung the customized kinetic rifle, chambering around with a sharp mechanical rack that sounded incredibly loud in the small room. "In human infantry tactics, we have a concept called the fatal funnel," Graves explained, his voice entirely devoid of fear. He checked his sidearm, a heavy .45 caliber pistol, and holstered it. When an assault team breaches a room, they have to come through the doorway. For one fraction of a second, they are packed together in a narrow space with nowhere to take cover. It is the most dangerous place in the world for them to be. Footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. Heavy, metallic thuds. The assassins had tracked them. Stand in the corner. Cover your ears and open your mouth so the overpressure doesn't blow out your eardrums, Graves instructed. Beatrice obeyed, pressing herself into the darkest corner, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Outside, a distorted, synthesized voice boomed through the steel door. "Open the door, human. Turn over the queen, and the syndicate will let you walk away." Graves didn't answer. He raised the rifle, seating the stock firmly against his shoulder, his eye aligning with the holographic sight. He pointed the barrel directly at the center of the thick steel door. "We are placing a thermal breaching charge," the voice outside warned. "You have 3 seconds." Graves remained perfectly still, a statue of focused violence. 1, 2, 3. A blinding white flash erupted around the edges of the door. The explosive charge blew the heavy steel deadbolts completely out of the frame. The door slammed inward, carried by the concussive force, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and pulverized stone. Through the thick smoke, 2 heavily armored syndicate assassins pushed into the doorway, their plasma rifles raised, their energy shields shimmering with a faint blue aura. They expected to sweep the room and burn whatever was inside. They never even got to pull their triggers. Graves opened fire. The deafening roar of the kinetic rifle in the enclosed space was catastrophic. It wasn't the high-pitched pew-pew of plasma weaponry. It was the thunderous, concussive boom of controlled explosions, driving solid mass at supersonic speeds. Bam, 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 bam. Graves fired in controlled pairs. The tungsten slugs hit the assassin's energy shields and shattered them instantly. The primitive kinetic energy overloading the alien micro-emitters in a microsecond. The slugs punched cleanly through their crimson armor. The first assassin's chest caved inward, and he was thrown backward into the corridor as if hit by a speeding grav train. The second assassin managed to take 1 step into the room before Graves put 2 rounds through his center mass, and a third squarely through the glowing red visor of his helmet, the Mozambique drill. Fast, brutal, and flawlessly executed. The second assassin collapsed, his helmet completely cored out. Silence fell over the corridor, save for the ringing in Beatrice's ears and the sharp clatter of 2 empty brass casings hitting the stone floor. Smoke poured from the barrel of Graves's rifle. From the corridor, the remaining 3 assassins froze. The leader of the strike team, a towering 7-foot alien named Hector, stepped slowly into the frame of the shattered doorway, staying carefully out of the fatal funnel. He looked down at the bodies of his 2 best men. They were dead. Not burned, not stunned. Erased. And they had been killed in less than 2 seconds. Hector looked at the spread of the bullet holes. 2 in the chest, 1 in the head. He looked at the shattered energy shields, completely bypassed by kinetic slugs. Then, his glowing visor slowly tracked upward, peering through the smoke until it rested on the human standing in the center of the room. Hector saw the stance. He saw the customized weapon. He saw the cold, unblinking gray eyes staring back at him over the barrel of the smoking rifle. The plasma cannon in Hector's hands began to lower. The glowing hum of his weapon whined down as he deactivated the firing sequence. "Hold your fire," Hector commanded his remaining men, his synthesized voice trembling with something Beatrice had never heard from the syndicate before. "Fear!" The 2 assassins behind him looked confused, keeping their weapons raised. "Commander, it's just a human. We can take him." "I said hold your fire, you idiots!" Hector roared, stepping back from the doorway. He looked back at Graves, his posture shifting from aggressive assault to defensive submission. "I know that stance," Hector said, his voice echoing in the quiet corridor. "I know that weapon profile, and I know what happened to the Vanguard at the Hades Ridge during the Centauri proxy war." Beatrice watched in absolute shock as the deadliest assassin in the sector slowly unclipped his plasma rifle from his harness and let it drop to the floor with a heavy thud. "You're the contractor," Hector whispered, staring at Graves as if looking at a ghost. "You're the demon of Sector 4. You're Reaper." Graves did not lower his rifle. The red dot of his laser sight rested perfectly between Hector's eyes. "Hello, Hector," Graves said, his voice calm, chilling, and devoid of mercy. "It's been a long time. Pick up your dead and tell Duke Arthur his contract is void. Or stay and see if I've gotten slower since Hades' Ridge." The silence in the shattered corridor was heavier than the heavy adamantine door that now lay in ruins on the stone floor. Dust motes danced in the harsh green glow of the chemical light stick, settling on the pulverized armor of the two dead assassins. Beatrice remained pressed against the cold wall of the safe room, her breath caught in her throat. She watched the towering alien assassin, Hector, stand completely paralyzed in the fatal funnel of the doorway. The crimson glow of his visor flickered, illuminating the raw terror radiating from his posture. Behind Hector, his two remaining subordinates, Briggs and Denton, heavily modified mercenaries from the Outer Rim, shared a look of frantic confusion. "Commander," Briggs hissed, his voice modulating through his helmet's external speakers. "It is one target. His kinetic weapon has a maximum capacity of 30 rounds. We have localized deflector shields and heavy particle cannons. We burn the room. Now," Briggs stepped forward, raising his heavy plasma rifle. Hector didn't just order him to stop. He violently backhanded Briggs across the chest plate, sending the mercenary stumbling backward into the corridor wall with a metallic crash. "I said drop your weapons!" Hector roared, his voice cracking with absolute panic. He turned to his men, pointing a trembling, armored finger at Graves. "Do you have any idea who that is? Look at the armor profiling. Look at the weapon. Look at the grouping of the shots on your dead brothers." Denton glanced down at the two corpses, two in the chest, one in the cranial plate. "It is an execution drill." "It's a human execution drill," Hector breathed, turning slowly back to face Graves, who had not moved a single millimeter. The red laser dot of Graves' rifle remained painted flawlessly between Hector's eyes. 3 years ago, the Syndicate was hired by the Orion mining conglomerate to break a miners' strike on Hades' Ridge. It was supposed to be a simple pacification job. 300 Syndicate operators against a bunch of rockhoppers. Hector paused, his mechanical breathing apparatus clicking loudly in the quiet corridor. "The miners pooled their credits and hired a human private military company," Hector continued, his voice dropping to a haunted whisper. "Just a small detachment, 12 men. They called themselves the Aegis Vanguard. We laughed at them. We had orbital plasma batteries, heavy mechanized walkers, and quantum-locked deflector shields. They had kinetic rifles, entrenching tools, and chemical explosives." Beatrice watched Graves's face. It was a mask of carved granite. There was no pride in his eyes, no boastful arrogance, just the cold, calculating geometry of a predator watching its prey. "The battle lasted 4 days, Hector said, his shoulders slumping. "We never even saw them. Our thermal optics picked up nothing because they covered themselves in freezing mud and thermal blankets. Our automated targeting drones were blinded by primitive white phosphorus smoke. When we tried to push through the canyons, they didn't engage our shields. They rigged the canyon walls with shaped kinetic charges and dropped thousands of tons of rock on our armored columns. They turned a high-tech war into a prehistoric slaughterhouse." Hector pointed at Graves. He was their point man. They called him Reaper. "I watched him hold the narrow pass at Sector 4 for 6 hours alone. My men pushed into that canyon, confident their shields would hold. He used armor-piercing tungsten rounds. He didn't aim for center mass. He aimed for the microscopic gaps in the armor plating at the joints and neck. He killed 42 of my best men before we called a full retreat. He is a ghost, Briggs. He is the thing that hunts the hunters." Hector slowly reached up and unlatched his helmet, letting it depressurize with a hiss before pulling it off. He revealed a scarred reptilian face, his yellow eyes locked onto Graves in a plea for survival. "The contract is void," Hector said, his hands raised in surrender. "Duke Arthur paid us 20 million credits. It isn't enough to die in this hallway. We are walking away, Graves." "Turn around, Hector," Graves said, his voice finally breaking the silence. It was low, raspy, and devoid of emotion. "Keep your hands where I can see them. Walk down the corridor. If you or your men turn your heads, I will put a tungsten sabot through your brainstems. If I ever see you in this sector again, I won't wait for a contract. I will come for you." Hector swallowed hard. He nodded once, slowly. Understood. He turned to his men. Leave the dead. Walk. Beatrice watched in utter disbelief as the deadliest strike team in the Ascendancy turned their backs and marched slowly down the servant corridor, disappearing into the darkness. Graves kept his rifle raised until the heavy metallic footsteps faded entirely. Only then did he lower the weapon, engaging the safety with a sharp click. He reached up, tapped a button on his earpiece, and spoke quietly. Simon, it's Graves. The package is secure. The Syndicate strike team is neutralized and retreating. Arthur committed. It's time for Phase 2. Graves turned to Beatrice, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. The terrifying specter of Reaper vanished, replaced instantly by the professional, understated bodyguard. Are you injured, Your Majesty? He asked, extending a hand to help her step over the shattered rubble of the door. Beatrice took his hand, her legs trembling slightly as she stepped out of the safe room. She looked at the blood pooling beneath the dead assassins, then up at Graves. You killed them in less than 2 seconds, she whispered. Speed is security, Graves replied simply. He said, You killed 42 men alone? Beatrice pressed, her voice a mixture of awe and horror. Are all humans like you? Graves paused, his gray eyes softening just a fraction. No, Your Majesty. Most humans are artists, engineers, farmers, and dreamers. They build beautiful things. I am simply the mechanism Earth created to ensure they are left alone to build them. Now, we have a window of exactly 20 minutes before Duke Arthur realizes his assassins have failed. We need to move. Move where? Beatrice asked, her royal composure finally beginning to return. To the military barracks? I need to rally the loyalist generals. No, Graves said, shaking his head. If we go to the military, it turns into a siege. Arthur will claim you were assassinated and use the confusion to declare martial law. In human warfare, when a high-value target attempts a decapitation strike and fails, you do not turtle up and wait. You exploit the chaos. You cut off the head of the snake before it knows it missed. Beatrice stared at him. You want to attack my uncle? Tonight? In his private estate? I don't want to attack him, Graves said, pulling a spare magazine from his tactical rig and slamming it into his rifle. I want to finish the contract. I told you, 50 million credits. Half up front, half when Duke Arthur is in prison or in the ground. Let's go earn my paycheck. Duke Arthur's private estate, the Spire of Valerius, was a towering monument to arrogance. It sat on an isolated cliff overlooking the capital city, protected by a dedicated microfusion shield grid and patrolled by a private army of mechanized sentries. It was supposedly the most impenetrable fortress on the planet. For an alien military, it would require a dreadnought in low orbit to crack the shields. For Thomas Graves, it required a grappling hook, a glass cutter, and zero gravity. The problem with absolute security is that it breeds absolute complacency, Graves whispered through the localized comms channel. They were clinging to the sheer glass exterior of the spire, 200 stories above the glittering city below. Graves had commandeered a low-altitude maintenance skiff, flying it under the radar ceiling by hugging the city's aqueduct system. He had bypassed the primary shield grid by simply flying beneath its curvature, deploying magnetic grappling lines to the exterior of the tower. Beatrice was strapped to Graves' heavy tactical harness, her bioluminescent gown replaced by a spare set of matte black tactical fatigues. She was terrified, the wind howling around them, but she clung to the cold logic Graves radiated. His security assumes an attack will come from the main gates, heavily armed and visible on scanners, Graves explained as he pressed a circular diamond-tipped cutter against the reinforced plasteel window. They don't monitor the exterior glass of the 210th floor because they assume no biological entity can scale a sheer, wind-battered cliff face without triggering the grav alarms. Are you sure this is his private study? Beatrice asked, her voice tight over the comms. Simon confirmed the architectural blueprints, Graves said. He applied a thin line of chemical solvent along the scored circle, then tapped it with the butt of his pistol. The heavy glass disc popped inward cleanly, caught by a suction cup Graves had attached beforehand. He pulled it out, setting it gently on the ledge, creating a perfectly round hole just large enough for a man to slip through. Stay close, stay quiet, and let me do the talking, Graves ordered. He slipped through the opening like a shadow, pulling Beatrice in behind him. They stepped onto the plush crimson carpets of Duke Arthur's private study. The room was lavish, lined with ancient texts and holographic trophies. At the far end of the room, sitting behind a massive desk of imported obsidian, was Duke Arthur. He was sipping a glass of amber liquid, his back turned to the window, staring at a massive holographic display of the city. He was waiting for the planetary broadcast network to announce the tragic death of the Queen. Graves moved with absolute silence. He crossed the room in 3 strides, reaching the desk before Arthur even registered a change in the room's air pressure. "Good evening, Duke Arthur," Graves said quietly. Arthur gasped, dropping his glass. It shattered on the floor, the amber liquid pooling into the carpet. He spun around in his chair, his eyes wide with shock. He looked at Graves, holding the heavy kinetic rifle, and then his gaze shifted to Beatrice, who stepped out from behind her bodyguard, her posture radiating cold royal fury. "Beatrice!" Arthur stammered, his aristocratic composure shattering completely. "How? The Syndicate." "The Syndicate was fired," Beatrice said smoothly, stepping up to the desk. "It turns out, Uncle, that your mercenaries have an aversion to human contractors. A matter of self-preservation, I believe." Arthur's eyes darted toward the edge of his desk, where a glowing biometric panic button sat flush with the obsidian surface. He lunged for it. Graves didn't shoot him. He didn't even raise his rifle. In a blur of motion, Graves drew a heavy combat knife from his chest rig and slammed it down, pinning the sleeve of Arthur's velvet robe to the desk, mere inches from the panic button. Arthur shrieked, pulling his arm back, but the blade was buried deep into the obsidian. "I wouldn't," Graves advised, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. Arthur fell back into his chair, breathing heavily. He looked at the knife, then at Graves, and finally at Beatrice. Slowly, a twisted, desperate smile crept across his face. "You think you've won?" Arthur sneered, composing himself. "You bypassed my security. You survived the hit. Congratulations, Beatrice. But you can't kill me. And you can't arrest me." "And why is that, Uncle?" Beatrice asked, crossing her arms. "Because I hold the leash to the Admiralty Board," Arthur spat, his confidence returning. "General Tyrus and Fleet Admiral Vane are loyal to my bank accounts. If I disappear, or if you kill me in cold blood in my own study, they will launch a military coup. They will glass the palace. You are the queen, but I am the foundation of the state. You need me alive to prevent a civil war." Arthur leaned back, steepling his fingers. He looked at Graves. "You are a very capable killer, human, but you don't understand galactic politics. A bullet cannot solve a systemic power structure." Graves stared at him for a long moment. Then he let out a short, dry chuckle. It was a terrifying sound. "You're right," Graves said, tapping his earpiece. "A bullet can't solve it, but a digital transmission can." Graves pulled a small silver data drive from his pocket and tossed it onto the desk. "Human warfare isn't just about kinetic force, Arthur," Graves said softly. "It's about information. While you were busy hiring assassins, I had my intelligence broker, Simon, trace the financial routing numbers you used to pay the syndicate. But that wasn't enough to convict you. So, when Hector and his men breached the safe room tonight, I didn't just point a gun at them. I recorded the conversation on a localized, encrypted military channel." Arthur's face paled. Hector confirmed on audio that Duke Arthur paid them 20 million credits to assassinate the sitting sovereign, Graves continued, leaning over the desk, his face inches from Arthur's. 5 minutes ago, while we were scaling your building, Simon uploaded that raw, unedited audio file, along with your encrypted banking ledgers, to every major news outlet, noble house, and military barracks in the Ascendancy. "No," Arthur whispered, his eyes darting frantically to the holographic display on his wall. Right on cue, the standard news feed cut to red emergency banners. The anchor's voice filled the room, reporting on the massive data leak exposing Duke Arthur's treason. "The Admiralty Board is greedy, Arthur," Beatrice said, her voice filled with quiet triumph. "They are loyal to your money, but they are not suicidal. No general will back a traitor whose crimes are currently being broadcast to 30 billion citizens across 7 star systems. You are politically, financially, and socially dead." Arthur slumped in his chair, utterly defeated. The grand architect of the Shadow War had been dismantled in less than an hour by a species that hadn't even discovered faster-than-light travel a century ago. Graves reached down and yanked his combat knife out of the desk, sliding it smoothly back into its sheath. "The royal guard is waiting in the lobby," Graves said, turning his back on the broken duke. "They have a warrant for your arrest. I suggest you go quietly." Graves placed a hand on Beatrice's shoulder, guiding her back toward the window. "Contract fulfilled, Your Majesty," Graves said as they prepared to hook back into the repelling lines. "Duke Arthur is heading to a maximum security orbital prison. The threat vector is neutralized." Beatrice looked out over her glittering city, the weight of the last 3 months finally lifting from her shoulders. She turned to the quiet, assuming man from Earth who had single-handedly broken a coup with geometry, paranoia, and a kinetic rifle. "You told me your fee was 50 million credits, Mr. Graves," Beatrice said, a genuine smile touching her lips. "That was the agreed-upon price," Graves nodded. "I'm doubling it," the Queen declared, "and I have a new contract for you to review tomorrow. I believe the Royal Military Academy needs a new curriculum on human tactical doctrine." Graves paused, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "I'll have my broker send over the paperwork, but I warn you, Your Majesty, we humans are very strict graders." If you enjoyed this intense, tactical sci-fi story of human supremacy and psychological warfare, hit that like button. We love bringing these HFY dramas to life, showing the galaxy why you never underestimate humanity's survival instincts. Don't forget to share this with your friends and subscribe to the channel for more epic, real-world inspired science fiction content every week. Let us know in the comments what kind of human tactics you want to see the aliens face next. Keep watching, and stay tactical.